In this video, we're going to explore the psychology of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. This video is going to be a little more complicated than my previous videos. I have tried to explain Nietzsche's psychology as clearly as I can, but you may need to rewatch the video a couple times to fully understand it. Nietzsche had two main objectives when he started working on his own psychological theory. Firstly, Nietzsche wanted to dissolve the oppositions between values created by metaphysics. His second objective was to dehumanize nature and to naturalize human beings. He would do this by showing that consciousness, language, and reason are natural. Consciousness, language, and reason did not have their origin in a world separate from nature. They have evolved from organic processes instead of having a metaphysical origin. These artificially constructed opposites have made people believe in the substantiality of the soul, and likewise that the soul is separate from the body. Nietzsche thought that these oppositions lead to a negative valuation of the very conditions of life, which poses nihilistic dangers. Part of Nietzsche's task of revaluing all values and affirming life depended on showing that consciousness, language, and reason belong to the natural realm. They have evolved from the instincts, so there is no ontological grounds for us to value them above the instincts. Now that we know what Nietzsche intended to accomplish with his psychology, we can move on to the nitty-gritty of it. But first, we need to define a few terms. Nietzsche frequently uses the terms drives, affects, and instincts, sometimes interchangeably, which can be a little confusing. We can think of affects as moods, feelings, and attitudes. The affect is the outward expression of these moods, feelings, and attitudes. By drives, Nietzsche means those forces, or what he sometimes calls underwills or wills to power. The drives are responsible for directing our behavior towards the satisfaction of certain organic needs. An affect is what it feels like to be driven by a drive. Another way to look at the drive is to view it as a valuation. Nietzsche interpreted the affects as expressions of either affirmations or negations. Since the drives are valuations, this means the way the drives express their ends is by either affirmations or negations. And the way Nietzsche connects the affects to the drives is by interpreting them as expressions of these affirmations and negations. So what does this all mean? Well, think of how you would affirm something that you liked or cared about. It would be through feelings of joy, gratitude, happiness, or love. Now think about the way you might respond to something you don't like. When we want to negate something we don't like, this rejection will be expressed with feelings of anger, contempt, disgust, or hatred. All these feelings or affects are expressions of valuations, and drives are these valuations. Because feelings express affirmations or negations, that means that they are expressions of the unconscious activity of the drives. To make this point even more clear, Nietzsche referred to the drives as souls. By directing our behavior towards the satisfaction of a certain need, a drive makes us value the satisfaction of that need. Not only do we value the satisfaction of a need when it occurs, but we also value the satisfaction of this need before it occurs. It is valued as an aim. A drive posits an aim as a value, making us wield the aim and feel for it. This explains why Nietzsche uses the terms drives and affects so loosely. They are descriptions for different stages in a process that is continuous. It's all pretty much the same thing fundamentally. In the book Human All Too Human, Nietzsche asserts that a drive towards or away from something without knowing its utility is inconceivable. For all disinclination depends upon an evaluation, just as does all inclination. Man cannot experience a drive to or away from something without feeling that he is desiring what is beneficial and avoiding what is harmful, without evaluating knowingly the merit of the goal. Nietzsche is not implying here that these aims or valuations are set by conscious mental states. Instead, they are unintentional and autonomous. This means that drives do not have some final aim or design beyond the satisfaction of organic needs. The drives are unteleological. The goal does not create their activity, but the activity creates the goal. It is with the concept of the drive that Nietzsche attempts to dissolve the opposition between reason, consciousness, language, the affects, and the instincts. No matter how far they develop, reason, consciousness, and language cannot be detached from, even less opposed to, the instincts. In several passages, Nietzsche describes human beings as a multiplicity of drives and affects. In The Gay Science, he describes conscious thoughts as only a certain behavior of the drives towards one another. And in Beyond Good and Evil, he declares, thinking is only a relation between these drives. Like the drives, instincts have goals that are not set by consciousness, but unlike the drives, Nietzsche thought of the instincts as a learned behavior or skill. We can think of the instincts as organic habits. Nietzsche calls them automatisms. The way Nietzsche refers to the processes that constitute the human organism is either by an alliance of instincts or a multiplicity of drives and affects. The essential point is that Nietzsche conceived of the relations between the instincts, drives, and affects as an uninterrupted succession or flow. Conscious thoughts have the same nature as the drives and affects because they are drives and affects that have become partially conscious. Nietzsche describes conscious thoughts as signs, symbols, or abbreviations. What he means is that our conscious thoughts are simplifications of the unconscious activity of the drives. The senses themselves simplify the information they receive, and so do the drives, which are the interpretive processes for the senses. What is more, our conscious thoughts are symbols of the interpretive processes of the drives. Which means there's at least 3 levels of simplification going on in our perception and understanding of the world. This is why Nietzsche rejects the idea of an objective, knowable world. We can't even perceive the objective world. It is physiologically and psychologically impossible. The way the world is interpreted is to fulfill basic organic needs. Consciousness, reason, and language are only instruments of the instincts. What we call reason and logic serve a deeper intelligence, the intelligence of instinct, which Nietzsche calls the greatest form of intelligence discovered so far. Nietzsche proposed that the rationality of our conscious mental life is really derived from the unconscious rationality of the body as a whole. Like I just mentioned, Nietzsche believed that instinct is the greatest form of intelligence, and rationality is really a continuation of the instinctive life of the drives. Another way to think of this is that instincts and drives are processes of unconscious thinking, feeling, and willing, while conscious mental states are developments of these same unconscious processes. As developments and surfaces, our conscious thoughts are signs of the unconscious activity of the affects, instincts, and drives. Conscious thoughts give expression to unconscious processes as signs and symbols. In a section from Nietzsche's notebooks, he describes conscious thoughts as the last link in a chain. Everything which enters consciousness is the last link in a chain, closure. It is just an illusion that one thought is the immediate cause of another thought. The events which are actually connected are played out below our consciousness. The series and sequences of feelings, thoughts, etc. that appear are symptoms of what actually happens. Nietzsche excluded what he calls the false explanation of causality from his psychological theory. Just because thoughts emerge from the drives, this does not imply that they are the result of causal processes. Nietzsche says that conscious thoughts do not cause other thoughts. The way the thoughts are produced from the drives cannot be explained in causal terms. To explain how thoughts are produced from drives, Nietzsche conceptualized a new language of the drives, which we will explore in just a moment. The essential point is that conscious thoughts are signs of the activity of the drives, and more importantly, they do not describe the real nature of this activity. When words express a particular thought, that is the result of a certain combination of instincts attempting to meet their needs. In other words, thoughts and words do not describe the true nature of anything. A thought, no less than a word, is only a sign. One cannot speak of a congruity between the thought and the real. The real is some sort of movement of the drives. A crucial point is that conscious thoughts are produced by the coordinated activity of the drives. Conscious thoughts depend on the forming of concepts, and these concepts are fixed representational signs for groups of sensations. Since the drives are valuations, they function as the interpretive process of the senses. And thoughts and words are signs of this activity. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche says that words are signs for recurring and associated groups of experiences. Words are like acoustical signs for often recurring and associated sensations, for groups of sensations. To understand one another, it is not enough that one use the same words. one also has to use the same words for the same species of inner experiences. In the end, one has to have one's experiences in common. The reason we need these symbols for our inner experiences is so that we can communicate our needs within a group. This means those experiences we share with others tend to be the basis within which we understand and come to identify with each other. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche continues, "Therefore the human beings of one people understand one another better than those belonging to different peoples, even if they employ the same language. Or rather, when human beings have long lived together under similar conditions. Language can only give expression to what is common, in other words, to what is herd-like. Language is a product of the herd's need to communicate, and consciousness was born out of this need for communication, which makes consciousness also a tool of the herd. This has very important implications for how we understand and describe ourselves. Because of the limitations of language, we can only give expression to the same inner experiences we share in common with others. As a consequence of the herd nature of language, people come to identify only with those they share similar experiences with. One consequence of this is that groups of people tend to become more similar over time, what Nietzsche calls a progressus in simile. Nietzsche describes words as acoustic signs for concepts. Words are signs of concepts, and concepts are signs of sensations. These sensations and the inner experiences that accompany them are always the result of the unconscious, perceptive, and intelligent activity of the drives and affects. Nietzsche describes conscious thoughts as symbols that express the activity of the drives and affects, and words are the symbols that express part of our conscious thoughts. In a musical metaphor, Nietzsche describes thoughts as chords played by the drives. Words are like a keyboard of drives, and thoughts in words are the chords that are played. If the drives are supposed to be responsible for thoughts and actions, then there has to be some sort of coordination among the drives. According to Nietzsche, there is an unconscious language of the drives. In his psychological investigation, Nietzsche uses the body as his starting point. The body appears to be a set of coordinated systems of higher and lower functions. This is a clue for how we can understand the life of the drives. Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche calls the body a social structure composed of many souls. In any social structure, there is an order of rank. Like people living in a commonwealth, the drives are organized into hierarchies. The communication among the drives is along the lines of command and obedience. In a commonwealth, the leaders issue their orders, and these orders are then carried out by people lower in the hierarchy. These hierarchies among the drives and this language of command is necessary for any coordination among the drives to be possible. In a section from Nietzsche's notebooks, he wrote, "Every thought, every feeling, every will is not born of one particular drive, but is a total state, a whole surface of the whole consciousness, and results from how the power of all drives that constitute us is fixed at that moment. Thus the power of that drive that dominates just now, as well as of the drives obeying or resisting. The next thought is a sign of how the total power situation has now shifted." There is a shared commonality among the drives, which is necessary for this coordination, just like in a commonwealth. Nietzsche also describes the language of the drives as a language of agreement. Commonality among the drives is necessary for understanding and agreement. Without this commonality, the commands issued by the dominant drives could not be obeyed. If someone who was speaking another language was issuing commands, you could not obey because of a lack of understanding. This language consisting of power relations among the drives and affects is what enables the issuing and receiving of orders. The relations of command and obedience which arises from the struggle between the drives is what makes the healthy functioning of an organism possible. The configuration of our drives remains mostly stable over the course of our lives. This is why our behavior, beliefs, and values appear to be mostly consistent over time. This configuration or hierarchy of drives is what determines who we are. By viewing the drives as wills, and with this new language of agreement, Nietzsche can get rid of the conception of causality. There is no will that acts on matter, or in this case on a nervous system. Rather, it is will acting upon will. This makes the will its own effect. In all willing, it is absolutely a question of commanding and obeying, on the basis of a social structure composed of many souls. If conscious thoughts are expressing the relations of drives and affects in an abbreviated and conceptual form, this means that they are expressing the power relations that are occurring among a multiplicity of wills to power. Conscious thoughts are signs of this play and struggle among the drives, and affects and words are signs of these signs. According to Nietzsche, no matter how neutral and descriptive the use of language may seem, it is an expression of unconscious power relations and power strategies among the drives. At this point, I can already imagine people blowing up the comments section saying things like, if all linguistic descriptions are just signs of unconscious power struggles among the drives and affects, then Nietzsche's theory must be just one more sign. Nietzsche's way of describing the unconscious and autonomous nature of the drives is entirely naturalistic. And it's an important part of Nietzsche's critique of metaphysics. But it does have a problem. If all conscious thoughts and words are just signs that express power relations among the drives and affects, then Nietzsche's naturalistic descriptions are no exception. These signs are only a sign language of his instincts that express unconscious power relations among the drives and affects. The terms he uses to describe these processes are nothing more than signs of the actual life of the drives. Nietzsche was well aware of this. In The Gay Science, he wrote, "When we criticize, we're not doing something arbitrary and impersonal. It is, at least very often, proof that there are living active forces within us shedding skin. We negate and have to negate because something in us wants to live and affirm itself, something we might not yet know or see." Nietzsche was an anti-dogmatist. He was not presenting his philosophy as a pure, disinterested description of reality. Instead, his philosophy should be understood as critical and evaluative, as well as being creative. Since all philosophical and scientific interpretations express the relations of drives and affects, then they should be viewed as instinctive valuations. What Nietzsche is trying to make explicit by this is that all interpretations are in fact creations. Thus, as Nietzsche says, every philosophy cannot be separated from its author. It is an expression of whatever type he happens to be. Every philosophy is either blind to its instinctive valuations or it is purposefully evaluative. Nietzsche describes his philosophy as the lengthy secret work of my instinct. His task of creating new values cannot be separated from his critical task of revaluing all values.